Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. This is Sub LBC, and we're doing another video episode of Growing for Freedom. Although, probably more of a audio episode, podcast style, basically. And yeah, guys, it has been a long time 4 years, actually, since doing my last cannabis related video. Obviously, I did do a recent video upload here just a day or so ago, or a few days ago. Um, but obviously, the content of that video is probably, uh, or I should say, the content of that video was obviously not what is kind of the status quo for this channel. And there are a lot of reasons behind that. And I wanted to kind of delve into that here in this video to kind of give you guys an update as to what's been going on here for the last 4 years, to give you kind of my insight and my perspectives on what's been going on, not only in the cannabis industry, but also in the overall economy, with the kind of the state of affairs of where we are as a country. Because I think that what's been going on in the cannabis industry, is kind of indicative of what we're seeing in the United States. And, this is going to be kind of an episode talking about, a term that has been thrown along or thrown out there in the zeitgeist of what has been referred to as late stage capitalism, which is something that I fear is something that we're going to have to come to terms with here in the next 5 to 10 years. That is really going to test the American people, because whether you guys want to accept it or not, I think it's pretty safe to say that the United States is starting to head towards a significant and sustained downturn. And there's a lot of reasons behind this. I'm going to try to expand on this as much as possible without this video getting too long. But suffice it to say, for all you guys that have been watching my videos for a while, I had made some bold predictions back in the day about, how I believed that the price of cannabis was going to start to kind of bottom out, and that, pounds were going to be selling for $2,000 or less. And as it turns out, my predictions were not quite bold enough. Nowadays, for those that are growing top shelf herbs, you might find it difficult to find a market for your products at even $1,000 per pound. I've been hearing stories coming out of California that, $800, for top shelf has pretty much become the norm here at this point. And yeah, it's really rough out there, guys. There's been a lot of what I refer to as whiplash effects here with this business. And we've seen it kind of occurring all throughout the country in various types of industries. Um, and obviously, a lot of this has to do with kind of the monetary policy that's been going on in the United States. Also, with the money grabbing and the bureaucratic fuckery of government, that seems to have just a weird way of doing things as it applies to the cannabis industry specifically. But I also do think that there's a lot of things going on systemically throughout all industries that's kind of putting all of our lives in peril. And it's really starting to become a sad state of affairs, especially when you look at the context of what's going on across the world today, and of course taking into consideration the political climate of the United States specifically as we head into the 2024 presidential election, which I'm predicting is going to be one hell of a shit show, guys. And we're going to talk a little bit about that here in this video or podcast or whatever you want to call it. So, obviously, I've not done an upload here on this channel in about 4 years, aside from the video that I just did a little bit ago. But obviously the content of that video is not, cannabis centric at all whatsoever, because at this point, guys, I'm pretty much out of the industry. I wanted to get out before it just completely bottomed out because I don't think it's completely dead, but it's kind of like in a zombie state here at this point. Obviously, for anyone that's invested in any cannabis companies, you don't need me to tell you, but if you invested during an IPO or bought the stocks while they were kind of close to their peak, you're probably down about 70 to 90%, and they could all eventually possibly even go to zero, because it seems to be the new kind of status quo to where companies don't really need to make profits anymore. to trade at high market caps, because at this point most of the American economy, I believe, is kind of built on fraud. And I do want to kind of get into that a little bit. But in order for this to be explained thoroughly, I think we need to talk about the context of what's been going on here with the American economy over the past couple of decades. So obviously one of the issues with American capitalism is this whole goddamn boom bust cycle that seems to be going on, every, well, what used to be like every 10 to 20 years, now turning into every like 5 to 10 years. And I fear that it's going to be getting even worse as time goes on. And unfortunately, as someone who is a member of Generation X, I've had to like deal with this multiple times now throughout my life. And I think that, I've kind of been in the wrong place at the wrong time over and over again. And although the cannabis industry had been quite lucrative for a long time, I think eventually it has now become, pretty much a business that no newcomer can ever, hope to achieve any type of realistic success, with the corporatization of the industry and with, government regulation, bureaucracy, corporate fuckery. I mean, we're, pretty much seeing an end to the small cap, mid cap, independent grower. It's just not a thing, and it's really unfortunate because, for a very long time it was really a unique industry where anyone could pretty much join in, and there were markets for everybody. It was very lucrative, but I think that the nature of what made it lucrative was something that wasn't necessarily sustainable. As we got more into the recreational space, mass decriminalization, I do believe that some of these things were really good, but the knock-on effects and the you know where it really affected the growers was kind of really not what we wanted. So at the end of the day, we are all basically beholden to the consumer. And with any market, consumers always want to get more for their money, so there's always like this kind of race to the bottom, which is understandable. But unfortunately, because of government bureaucracy and overreach, the burdens that have been put on the cannabis industry are just way too cumbersome. And there are a lot of aspects to the cannabis industry in terms of regulation that are just not seen in any other industry, and it's just completely ridiculous. And there's only so much absurdities that one can tolerate before at some point you just have to throw your arms up and just say, I've had enough. It is time to move on and to get into other things. And that's kind of where I'm at here at this point. So for all you guys that don't already know this, I've been growing here at this point for nearly 20 years, which means that I've been doing this longer than any other career that I've ever had by far in my professional life. But towards the end, and even when things were just doing really well, guys, and I have to stress this, I should say I can't stress this enough that, I've been very successful in this business over the last 4 years and done incredibly well. But strangely enough, is that even during the height of my success, there was these inkling feelings that, I just really don't want to do this anymore. You know what I'm saying? And again, throughout my professional career, which is unique to me, I've generally only spent about, 2 or 3 years doing a specific line of work before I just wanted to kind of move into something else. And for me, it started off with, mostly information technologies and certain types of sales related to that industry, um, only to watch that industry completely implode with 9/11. Obviously the tech bubble had burst just a year or two before, but 9/11 was really the coup de grace that kind of like ended my career in information technologies. And then from there, made the transition into doing mortgage lending, which I did for a number of years and made a lot of money doing it. But a lot of money is relative when you're living in California. And when that whole thing just blew up, again, it's just like, picking up the pieces and starting over. and that's when I made the transition into the cannabis industry. And it was great, and obviously I hadn't gotten in, at the very beginning. There had been people that had been doing this for a long time, well before me, and even before it was legal to do so in any respect. Um, but obviously, things had started to change in 1996, with the whole medicinal movement. And because there just weren't that many participants, but there was a high amount of demand, it was very lucrative, and it was very lucrative for a really long time. But obviously, when there's a lucrative market, it's going to bring more market participants. Um, and as time has gone on, we've now seen the whole, recreational movement, mass decriminalization, multiple states now decriminalizing cannabis, which, ultimately I think is a really great thing. And I don't think it's something that should be walked back. But unfortunately, for reasons that I don't even to this day quite understand, invited in a massive amount of government overreach, bureaucracy, money grabbing, combined with corporate fuckery, which have completely destabilized the industry. And again, it's still a multi-billion-dollar market, right? I mean, there are players involved, and they're going to make their money, and that's fine. Um, However, I think that this whole attitude of gaining market share, in trying to achieve some kind of pseudo monopolization, has really come at a great cost to the kind of, a lot of the people that are pioneers in the industry. And just like with every other corporate dominated space, most corporations are more than happy to sacrifice, uh, you know, uh, overall profits for market share, right? It's better to have a lower profit margin as long as you have no competitors in your industry, right? That seems to be kind of the goal, which to me is just strange because it kind of goes against what I've always believed capitalism was supposed to be, where you have essentially complete freedom of market participation, and consumer decisions are essentially what influence winners and losers, as it should be, and that everyone can find their niche. And if you're not able to find a niche, then you fail, and that's just the way it goes. But unfortunately, as we kind of head into this, late stage capitalism, which I believe we're in right now, you know, that's just really not how corporations behave anymore. And I think that over the last 10 or 15 years, ever since the real estate bubble bursting back in, you know really starting around 2006 was kind of when the writing was on the wall. But obviously by 2008 is when things had just completely collapsed. And ever since then, the United States has been kind of operating on a zombie economy, and mostly built on fraud and just unwise decision making, brought upon by completely horrendous and grossly irresponsible monetary policy. And I think that the cannabis industry is an industry that's been affected by this, but even more so because of the amount of regulations, government burdens, put on the industry specifically that you just don't see in any other industry. I mean, to my knowledge, there is no other industry in the agricultural space that has something even remotely resembling a seed to sale model. This whole idea of metrics, having to, as a business, incur all the costs of a regular business, in terms of permitting and licensing and whatnot. But now you have to pay some, company that has a monopoly on, the technology that's used in seed for sale, having to buy tags, and, every one of your plants has to be tracked. And then from there, all of your product be tested, it's put into metrics. And then you got to pay like a, secure transport company to move your product from production to distribution. And of course, if you want to be a distributor, you have a whole uh, plethora of hoops and hurdles that you have to deal with just to do that. And these licenses, guys, they're just absolutely absurd. I mean, we're talking anywhere from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars to operate an industry, or to operate a business in this space. And you just don't see that, anywhere else. And it's still very arcane, in terms of, using plant count as a determining factor of what level of licensing you can get, which, again, makes no sense, especially when you look at the potential diversity of different growing styles. And at this point, like we've seen in other uh, corporate sectors, we now have a situation to where the costs, the barriers of entry are so extreme that anyone that's trying to break in, as a newcomer, whether it be small or mid cap, style in terms of scale, you're just not going to make it, right? I mean, there's already the power players are defined. They want to monopolize the market. Um, and monopolies don't want to give up their monopolies, right? And they're definitely willing to shed, profitability to maintain monopolization. And it's unfortunate, because although I think that this is translated into lower prices for consumers, it has also meant that yield, dictates now over quality. And I've definitely seen it myself firsthand. The quality of products now made available are just not what they used to be. You know what I'm saying? Like they're just simply not there. When you have a entire market that is fixated on yield, because if they don't get high yields, they're basically going to go bankrupt. You're going to see a massive drop off in quality. And the only way to really get around this is to grow your own, and that obviously comes with its own caveats. Uh, many things that your average consumer is just not going to want to deal with to get their herb. And I also believe that there's been gross um, mishaps in terms of, predicting how large the market can truly be. So there's been a ton of overinvestment by the large corporate players. They basically misread the market, overinvested, and it's gotten so bad to where even the largest corporate players, especially here in my region, are forced to break the law and sell all their shit black market. And they've just been flooding the every level, whether it be dispensaries, street dealers, you name it, man, selling illegally out of state. They're pretty much desperate to move their product, because at the end of the day there's millions of dollars on the line. And this has basically caused a plummeting of prices at the wholesale level. And of course, with this happening, it's pushed all the small and mid cap participants completely out of the market. So as a newcomer, your chances of being successful these days is pretty much next to nothing. Now, obviously, with somebody like me, I've been around, for a long ass time, but I at some point need to, look at the writing on the wall and read it for what it is. And, when I was in the mortgage industry back as it was imploding, I still had a lot of, hopium, copium, whatever you want to, call it, where I did believe that there could be some kind of a rebound. And I probably lingered around the industry a little bit longer than perhaps I should have. And it's one of my major regrets, is not being truthful with myself. And, given the situation that I'm in now, um, yeah, I think it's just a good time to get out. It's not something that I'm really terribly passionate about anymore. I think that a lot of people that have been working with me in the industry kind of get that read that I'm just kind of like, when I was still in it, that I just didn't really give a shit. Like I'm always wanting to do something else. I just want to move on to something else. I'm not exactly sure what that something else is exactly, and this is something that I'm trying to figure out. And I know that a lot of you other guys are out there are probably faced with the same realization. I know that I've had personal conversations with those that have completely exited out of the industry entirely. And it's sad, because, I know that there are some that have done really well. They paid off their houses and provided for their families, done really well. But, at some point, they're not making any money. You know what I'm saying? And this is a business now where the margins are so razor thin that just a handful of mistakes can be the difference between, just eking out a meager existence or completely having your operation just blow up in your face. And when you're in an industry that operates like that, You pretty much need to be honest with yourself and realize that maybe this just isn't the best thing to do, and maybe it's time to move on to something else. But what that something else is going to be, at this point, guys, I cannot honestly tell you, because I think that right now the state of affairs in the United States is really, really bad. And I don't think that a lot of people realize how bad it is. I mean, obviously, we are facing inflation like we've never seen it before. And this actually exacerbates the issue in terms of the cannabis market, because it's not just like, the prices of herb have stayed the same, have flattened while we're dealing with inflation, which technically means it's losing value, right? I mean, if the money is losing its value and the price of herb is not changing, then obviously, with all the costs involved are also going up, obviously your profitability is being squeezed there a little bit. But that's not the situation. The situation is the price of cannabis is falling while we are in a really high inflationary environment. So that means you're really getting chewed away. It's like the candle is burning at both ends, and it's only going to get worse. And I think that ultimately, you know, the cannabis industry is really just an agricultural product. It's not anything specialized about it. It's like any other agricultural product, except for the fact that it has a massive, massive amount of government bureaucracy, money grabbing, fuckery going on, that make it even more volatile to participate in. And at some point, you just have to be like, enough is enough. You know what I mean? There's got to be something else out there. And I know that's kind of a bleak attitude to have, especially now, because the situation is really rough, and I don't have any answers for the future. I mean, this is something that I'm still, been trying to figure out for the last couple of years myself. I've just been lucky enough to kind of put myself into a position where I can spend a couple of years trying to figure this out, and I'm not exactly sure where I'm gonna go with things. Obviously, I've always had an interest in filmmaking, and it was really great for me, especially with the whole YouTube channel with growing, because they kind of worked, hand in hand with one another. But it wasn't really much of a storytelling art. It's more of like a endless documentary of just repetitive things. Going over the same stuff over and over and over again. And to be fair, the cannabis industry is not even nearly as interesting as it used to be. Back in the day, there was just all kinds of evolutions going on, like all kinds of different techniques that were being employed. And, there are a lot of different ways of doing things, in terms of your growing style, your choices of nutrients, um, you know, lighting systems were starting to evolve, obviously going from analog to digital, now to LED. But now I do feel that there's been, kind of a plateau being reached. A lot of growers these days, at least where I'm located in, are all pretty much growing the same way because they have to. Their licensing is all based on plant count that dictates the growing style. Obviously, everyone's going with LEDs these days, which you pretty much have to here at this point in order to remain competitive, because the costs, even though they might be a little bit more stiffer up front, they've come down quite a bit. LEDs are not nearly as expensive as they used to be, and they're all pretty much uniform these days. I mean, obviously, when LED was first breaking onto the scene, there were all kinds of different companies doing things in different ways, but we're really not seeing that anymore. There's now kind of more of a uniform style of approach when it comes to LED lighting. Um, I wouldn't say they're quite perfected yet, compared to like say, digital HID ballast style grows, but it's not that far off before pretty much all LED manufacturers are pretty much going to be uniform in their approach to design and having all the features that growers need. And now, since there's so little participation from small and mid cap growers, the commercial style growers are pretty much the primary target audience now, or target, I guess, consumers of this technology, and they all have the same demands. You know what I'm saying? So you're pretty much going to see just a uniform implementation of pretty much all this technology. And there's really no more evolution, unless something completely insane happens that revolutionizes the industry. But I just don't really see it happening, which makes cannabis kind of an uninteresting subject, at least for me, in terms of doing the work itself or documenting it. I mean, and I think that that's actually been kind of an issue leading up. I mean, a year or two leading up to my last cannabis video upload, which was now over 4 years ago, was kind of a problem with my channel. It was just after a while it just becomes uninteresting. Everyone's doing the same thing. We're all growing with all very similar nutrients now here at this point. There's very little variation, and it's just the same thing. And honestly, that's really kind of how cannabis growing is. It's a repetitive thing. You're just living from cycle to cycle to cycle. That's pretty much how things go when you're growing. And yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is, guys, that I'm just bored to tears of the industry. And I look at the writing on the wall of where it's going to be heading into the future, and I just don't want to have anything to do with it anymore. But unfortunately for me, the things that I am the most interested in now are also industries that are just oversaturated. And in fact, if you look across all of the corporate space, it seems that every industry is just oversaturated. We're sick and tired of the same old crap. You look at Hollywood, for instance, and it's just become a fucking joke. It's like we're heading on to like our 150th Marvel movie now, and they're all flopping like crazy. Disney doesn't seem to know how to make good uh, content anymore. We've seen oversaturation in these streaming services now where, every company thinks they can have their own streaming service, and now streaming services cost more than cable used to cost. And, Americans as consumers are just getting sick and tired of all of this fuckery. And, I think that all of the fraud and all of the scams that have been happening in Wall Street over the past few years, I think there's an old saying that Warren Buffett said, like when the tide goes out, we all get to see, what everything looks like underneath, who's wearing shorts and who isn't. And, all of this 0% interest, monetary policy has really caused a huge amount of problems in terms of how corporations behave. It used to be, that in order for you to become a publicly traded company, you had to actually first prove that your company was profitable, right? You couldn't just basically go, oh, I've got like, 50 billion or 15 billion or 5 billion or 500 million dollars of investor capital that I can just burn through. I'm going to go public to bring in more money in order to gain market share. And then after I have market share, I'm going to figure out how to actually make a profit. I mean, that's not the way it's supposed to be. You know what I'm saying? Before you used to, from what I understand, before all the mass deregulation, you had to prove that you were a profitable business for like 5 years before you could even think about doing an IPO. And now, we have, SPACs. And for all you guys that don't know what a SPAC is, it's a special purpose acquisition company where essentially you can create a fraudulent business, right? Well, I shouldn't say a fraudulent business. You basically create a SPAC, which is not really a company at all. It's essentially just a pool of investment capital that's put into a SPAC, and then you take the SPAC public, and then after the SPAC goes public, you then use that SPAC to merge with another company that's a complete fraud, and that way you're actually able to take a company public without having to go through the underwriting process, or the traditional process of doing a corporate IPO, right? So I don't know, I'm getting into like crazy corporate jargon, which a lot of people may not truly understand, but it's really difficult to take a company public, because obviously when you're taking your company and putting it up for sale, or at least a portion of it up for sale to the public to invest in, it's really important that there are some regulatory standards put into place to make sure that it's just not a fraudulent way for corporate bankers and fraudsters to just basically steal potentially billions of dollars of public money investment, right? And then just declare bankruptcy and then walk away with a golden parachute. That's unacceptable. So, with all that being said, that's kind of what the SPAC is, and if you look at some of the SPACs that we've seen in recent years, they've been absolutely awful. I think one of the worst ones was Nicola Motors. I don't know if you guys know about Nicola, but there's a guy named Trevor Milton, who basically just defrauded, the investors out of billions of dollars, basically just making up lies, creating a fake hydrogen powered semi truck that was never functional, right? It was a complete, we're talking like literally 100% fraud. And then you've got companies like, WeWork, which I believe went public via SPAC, was a complete fraud and is now going through bankruptcy. In fact, I can't think of a single SPAC that was not a complete and absolute and total fraud. And it's just crazy that, that this is the corporate climate that we live in. But, again, this is what happens when you have completely absurd monetary policy, 0% interest rates for decades, inflation that's constantly chewing away, and when you put that kind of pressure on people, it forces people to do grossly irresponsible things with money, because at the end of the day, you have to, right? I mean, if you don't put your money into other vehicles, then you're basically just getting eaten away by inflation. So this really creates some disgusting side effects where, people just don't want to really save money. I mean, what's the point? You're a sucker, if you save money. I mean, seriously, you put your money away into a Bank of America savings account, and you're going to be earning like, 0.02% interest or whatever on your account. Well, inflation is like at like 5, 8, 10%. You know what I'm saying? So if you're saving money, you're a sucker. And when you have this kind of situation going on, at the highest levels, we're talking billions of dollars of capital that needs to be allocated somewhere. Otherwise, you're just going to basically be losing 10% per year. It causes these kinds of irresponsible actions at the highest levels. And it unfortunately leads to really negative repercussions for everyone downstream of it. And I think that, you have a situation, with like, say, COVID, where the government basically just pumps trillions of dollars of freshly printed money out of thin air into the economy. We can't be surprised when we're going to have, massive amounts of inflation. And it really just makes our economy even more volatile, which is why I think that the boom bust intervals have been becoming much shorter. I mean, it used to be, again, once every like, 10, 15 years, you'll have like a pretty big systemic reset in certain market sectors. But now it seems that like we're on a pace where it's like every 5 years we're having like an economic meltdown. And from what I can see, we're about to come into probably the longest sustained recession is since the Great Depression. And it might even be something that's even worse than the Great Depression, because at no point in the history of the United States have we been, over $30 trillion in debt, which is just absolutely crazy. I mean, and when you look at the leadership, there are competing philosophies in terms of, how real change can happen in this country, whether it be from the top down or from the bottom up. Well, I can tell you that if we're looking at top down, it's not looking too good, guys. I mean, we are now heading into a 2024 election cycle, which is basically going to be Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. I do not believe that there's any other Republican which is going to be able to challenge Trump, regardless of his legal situation. Even if Trump straight up gets thrown into prison, I still think that there are just so many diehard voters that are going to, be there for him, that he is pretty much the de facto nominee at this point, and he knows it. And I think that everyone else knows it too. And all this crap going on between, Nikki Haley and, that new, whatever his name is, the Indian guy, the biotech billionaire guy. These guys are just, window dressing here at this point. And I don't think that anybody in the political space has any great ideas. So far from what we're hearing from Trump, his presidency, if he wins it again, is pretty much just going to be a reckoning where he just, goes around punishing, all of those that he thinks, have basically worked against him, as he goes through all these civil fraud trials and, false electors. And, I mean, it's just an endless fucking stream of shit. And on the other side, you have a president who like doesn't know where he is half the time, right? I mean, he's so old that he literally is just like losing his mind. The political climate in the United States has never been as bad as it is right now. On the Republicans especially, I think there's just a lot of problematic people. I mean, you have guys like that George Santos, who's a complete fraud. You got to deal with him. Mitch McConnell seems to be losing his mind on a regular basis. He just basically gets up during a speech and then just forgets where he is and what's going on and just sits there silently, not even understanding. He's literally at like having a stroke live multiple times. You have complete unhinged, insane people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. The Republican Party is really just a complete shit show. And when you look on the Democratic side, again, it's just more of the same shit. They have no new ideas. They're weak. They don't have any political will to really do anything because at the end of the day, they are all beholden to the same, money, lobbyist money that the Republicans are. And it's like, their entire shtick is basically just trying to pretend to be an opposition party when in fact, they're all just chasing the same dollars. You know what I'm saying? They need the same corporate money. They need the same lobbying money, money from super PACs. And of course, when you're completely bought and paid for, I mean, there's really no way that you can exact any real change without committing political suicide, which nobody wants to do because at the end of the day, they're all self serving. So, the Democratic Party is just not really a true answer to any problems that Republicans cause. But the Republicans, though, I mean, if you look at Trump's presidency, he has really done a lot of accomplishing the overarching agenda of the GOP. I mean, look at the changes made to the Supreme Court. Massive tax cuts, deregulation of specific industries. Agree with it. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I get it. There are arguments to be made on both sides on, where to go. But I think that one thing that everyone can agree on is that the government at the federal level is pretty much becoming a dysfunctional mess. And, if Trump is reelected, there's going to be benefits in some ways. Personally, I think that the greatest benefit of Trump being reelected is just the sheer amount of chaos that he's going to bring on in the federal government. And I consider that a good thing because, chaos destroys things. And I think that the federal government needs to be destroyed. Uh, I think that, what's his name? Ramasamy. I don't even know if I'm saying his name right. But, he says some big things. Of course, he's not going to do any of them if he were to be elected. But, eliminating 50% of all government employees, that's a damn good start. I'm never going to see it happen. But if it did, it would be amazing. But on the other side, if Biden gets elected, then we basically have a ineffective milquetoast president that just gives us more of the status quo. It's kind of like the slow death. And honestly, guys, if I have a choice between taking a gunshot to the head or being whittled down by razor blades over the course of 4 years, I'll take the gunshot. You know what I'm saying? I'd rather die the quick death because I think that, the quicker we can destroy the system, the quicker we can get into building one in its place that is hopefully, somewhat functional. That's kind of my attitude. And it's really sad, that's like the state of affairs at the highest level of government. So I guess my point is that, this whole idea of a top down type of restructuring or reforming, is pretty much not really going to be where we need to, look at for, real change in this country. It is going to have to come from the bottom up. But the question is that, can we expect some kind of bottom up change when we have like, Gen Z and, millennials and whatnot, basically squabbling on, what a woman is, right? Or endlessly bickering about the conflict in Israel between the Palestinians and Israelis, or attitudes about Russia and Ukraine. It seems that everyone's just distracted about or distracted with all these other issues that are really, I don't even think that are that terribly important. I know this might come as a controversial opinion, but I don't think that racism in America or police brutality is anywhere close to the most important issues in this country. I think that ultimately our biggest issue revolves around monetary policy. And I'll talk more about that in future videos. It is something that I've been doing a lot of research on, over the last couple of years. And I do have some interesting ideas. Will any of them be implemented? Probably not, because they make too much sense. And I think there are way too many people that, are taking advantage of the system as it exists today, and they're not about to give it up, and they don't give a shit if 99% of the rest of the population has to basically eat their own excrement in order to survive. That's just kind of the state of affairs that we're in, and it's not sustainable. It's not tenable. But you know, I wish human beings could be more logical and it could have more foresight. But ultimately, they don't. You know what I'm saying? There's a real huge problem in this country, or I should say, a plethora of problems, um, in which nobody that's in the driver's seat has any real solutions for, right? And it's really unfortunate because, right now we really do need like strong leadership. We need real change that is quick and impactful, intelligent, logical, and I just don't see it happening on the horizon. So, yeah, guys, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm just as confused and lost as all of you are. And I know that a lot of you guys are struggling out there, probably disillusioned, demoralized. Um, and I really wish I had better news on that front. But I think that in the meantime, the best thing that we can do is to educate ourselves as much as we can about the state of affairs and the situations that we're actually in, and be real with one another about what we are dealing with. And I think it's really important, I think more so than anything else, that we are all able to get on the same page in terms of prioritizing the problems that are going on, because if we don't, then we're going to probably lose this country. I think that, I mean, look, based on what I'm seeing right now, I don't think that the United States has even 10 years left in terms of being like the superpower, right? Like the big dog in the world stage. We are seeing some things going on globally that are kind of like setting the new precedent that the United States is going to have to be forced to step aside. It's not something we're going to do by choice. It's going to be something we're going to be forced to do based on the completely absurd and poor decisions that we've made over the last, I'd say it's somewhere between 5 to 10 years. But these are, again, going to be subjects for future videos. But at this point, I think that I've gone on a little bit too long here with this one. But in any case, I hope you have enjoyed it. As always, feel free to comment, to rip this video apart, or to ask questions, or to, potentially give some ideas of what you would like me to talk about more in the future. But as always, I do appreciate you guys, those few that are still left watching these videos. I appreciate you guys more than anything. I'm glad you're all still there. And thanks a lot. Hope to talk to you soon.